Number 10, the Siege of Orleans. Or Orleans. As history would have it, the French and English were at each other's arms again. Oh, who would have thought? It's a very common trend in history, except this time, France was losing really badly, like super badly. So one day when a young peasant girl walked into the king's throne room and said, "Bro, I got this. A godly angel vision sent me here to fight back and rid France of the English." Running low on everything, including men, the king agreed. The Siege of Orleans was to be the final nail in the coffin for France until Joan of Arc showed up. She led the army to victory against the English. They were stunned and she became a hero overnight. It's a good thing not too long after that they burned her at the stake for being a witch. Very nice. No, it's not nice, it's horrible. God, can't have anything nice. Number 9, the Battle of Waterloo. The Corsican ogre, Napoleon Bonaparte. His military career is most impressive, maybe the most impressive out of any military leader to have ever lived. You gotta watch a more detailed video of his battle plan, seriously, the guy's crazy. But in a nutshell, his tactics saw him win the day, time and time again, even though he was severely outnumbered by multiple European nations trying to take him down. Well, it seems his luck had finally run out because at Waterloo, he received his first major defeat, and ever since that, well, he was kind of on the run. He was forced to retreat. They had him on the run. Eventually, he would surrender and was banished. He came back to be a tyrant and then was banished a second time, even harder. And France kind of went back to being France and not dictator France. Number 8, the Battle of Gettysburg. The North versus South. A house divided amongst itself cannot stand. One fighting for a noble cause, the other fighting for a, well, not so noble cause. Up until the Battle of Gettysburg, the South had been winning tactful battle after tactful battle. They were kind of good. General Lee of the Confederacy was making his invasion of the North very notable. However, on July 1st, 1863, that's a couple years before Canada was born, the Battle of Gettysburg commenced, the largest and most costly battle of the war. The thing is, this time it was a Union victory, and the Union used this momentum to carry themselves all the way back down south and eventually to victory.
Number 7, Combat of the 30. Also known as Combat des Trente, you can say that if you're feeling fancy of course, but the Combat of the 30, easier for me to say, took place during the Breton War of Succession. This was back in 1351. This battle was arranged beforehand, you know, bring your shiniest armor and your most golden gal and meet me at the battlefield at Brittany. Throw a little note in, and then both sides had 30 champions. They had their best knights come forth in all the land, and they just fought it out. One side represents the King of England, the other the King of France. This whole thing was arranged by one guy, a captain in the French banner named Jean de Bonmanior. This event pulled in a crowd. Drinks were literally served throughout the audience. This fight lasted a very long time. Hours went by, and 4 French knights had fallen, as well as 2 Englishmen. So they started taking breaks. Yeah, like a common sporting event now. By the end of the whole thing, the English surrendered after losing 9 knights, and the French in total lost 6. And nobody tipped the servers. All bad.
Number 6, the Battle for Castle Itter. Wehrmacht versus SS. May 5th, 1945 was the final act of WW2, or really the last few days in Europe. So when American soldiers came across a Wehrmacht detachment defending an Austrian castle full of high value targets from some other Germans who hadn't seen the big picture yet, yeah, it was going to be crazy. So the Americans joined forces with these renegade Germans to help defend the castle. I'm gonna call on Hollywood again here. Come on guys, this one just writes itself. The ensuing battle was very hectic as ammo was running dry and becoming something of a nail biter, when finally reinforcements showed up to rescue the motley crew. What made Germans turn against Germans? Was it 5 years of WW2? Maybe it was hunger, grief, or maybe they were just fed up with Mustache Man. Either way, it makes for a great story and shows that not everyone is terrible. The enemy of mine enemy is mine friend.
Number 5, the Battle of Los Angeles. Of course we have to mention one of the most unspeakable battles of all time, the Battle of LA, otherwise known as the Great LA Air Raid. It happened during World War II at the end of February 1942. This event, first of all, took place only a few months after the Pearl Harbor attack, so everybody was obviously immensely stressed out. Something like 25 enemy aircraft was spotted flying over LA in the late hours of February 24th, so air raids went off. Blackouts were now in effect. This was not a drill. Right? Or was it? Artillery fire, machine guns, anti-aircraft shells, in total around 1,400 shells were blasted off. 2 people had heart attacks. 5 people in total died from this retaliation, and it was indeed a false alarm. A press conference was held by Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox, and he called the incident war nerves. Yeah, just nerves. Ha, whoopsies, thought I heard a noise. Meow, oops, sorry about your heart attacks.
Number 4, the Emu War. Australia, a land of beautiful landscapes, sunshine, and an accent that I'm trying to master. It's not that easy. All crocodile hunters aside, they are infamous for a battle of biblical proportions, something that was so huge and magnificent it for sure had to be talked about. It's the Emu War. Yes, that's right, the Aussies went to war with emus, and they lost. Okay, hold on. Before I get blooming onions thrown at me, let me explain. Basically, the Great Depression was hard for Australia. It was hard for everybody, but especially them. It was rough. Even rougher was emus destroying their crops. Really bad. So bad, the farmers called upon the government, who then called upon the army, who then called upon a couple of dudes with a truck and a machine gun to deal with it. Trouble is, they were just too darn good at dodging gunfire. The emus, that is. One politician jokingly said, the emus should be given medals for their bravery. I don't even know about that one. I don't even know. That's just, okay, they missed. I guess they missed. Number 3, the Battle of Quebec. The 7 Years' War was interesting to say the least, and some consider it to be the first global conflict. Kinda is. While not talked about a lot, there actually was a lot of conflict in Europe at the time, especially between Austria and the other European powers. However, for history class, what's most studied is the conflict in North America. Basically, it was a fight over who got North America and or the territories that were owned by each other. That's pretty much what it was a fight over. And for French Acadians, the Battle of Quebec would decide it all. Unfortunately, it ended in English victory, a large portion of Acadians moving south to what is now Louisiana, and lines on the maps changing drastically. The early borders of both what would become America and Canada. It also helped set the stage for the American Revolutionary War. Also cool, because now we have America. And they're cool, I like America. I love you, America. Oh, say can you see? Number 2, the Battle of Okinawa. Years of island hopping and trying to dig out Japanese forces from the Pacific Islands had left its mark on everyone. By 1945, Japan was getting desperate. Very desperate. Supply lines were running thin. Men were also thin because of supply shortages, and well, there just wasn't enough manpower to fight the oncoming Americans. Seemingly at every tropical step America took, Japan met them with full force. Okinawa was no different and was the last island worth defending before mainland Japan. So they fought fiercely, no mercy, and when the Marines came out of the jungle they knew what was next. Or at least so they thought. And number 1, Pearl Harbor. This is the battle that changed it all, folks. Japan suddenly attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. Before this, America wasn't exactly neutral, as history tells it, as they had been supplying allies in Europe for cold hard cash, and they had embargoed Japan on their oil supply. So no, not exactly neutral. However, they were fully convinced that they were not going to get involved. They learned their lesson from the Great War and had no interest in sending young men to fight in what was going to be the worst conflict in human history. So yeah, it kind of brought America into the whole thing.
Number 10, Marathon. The Battle of Marathon took place in 490 BC during the first Persian invasion of Greece. It was fought between the citizens of Athens and Plateau together as one force to defend against the Persian army commanded by Datis and Artis Phyrnus. The battle was the culmination of the first attempt by Persia under King Darius I to subjugate Greece. The Greek army, the underdog in this, inflicted an embarrassing defeat on the many more Persians, marking a turning point in the Greco-Persian Wars. Roughly 25,000 Persians against 10,000 Greeks. I'm on Team Greece, because they're clearly the underdog here, and the victors. Also safe to say Greece's confidence skyrocketed after this victory. King Darius the Great and his army fled with their tails between their legs. This battle was a response to Athens and Greeks being done underneath Persian rule. Yeah, they're like, you know what, we're out, okay dude, we're done. So Darius the Great took great vengeance upon the Athenians, which didn't really work out so well for him. Number 9, Thermopylae. Cut to part 2 of the same series, the Battle of Thermopylae. This was fought 10 years later in 480 BC between the Persian Empire again, this time under Xerxes I, and now Sparta under Leonidas I. Yeah, they were still pissed and wanted some more hands, so they came back. Basically, Greece's Navy SEALs decided to jump in this time. And the Greco-Persian Wars continued. Only lasted about 3 days, actually. Yeah, those Spartans, they're good. We're familiar with this tale as old as time. 300 Spartans held off like 300,000 Persians. Yeah, little more this time, they were definitely not bluff, but neither was the 900 Spartans and rebels. There was one path in, which was Thermopylae, and the Spartans did not let them by. You shall not pass! And they didn't. If you haven't seen 300, watch it. It's an amazing movie. Number 8. The Third Servile War. No, not the Civil War, the Servile War. Oh. AKA the Gladiator War. I'm Spartacus. No, I'm Spartacus. Okay, yeah, we get the reference, but who really was this guy? Well, he was a Thracian gladiator who, along with 4 others, was the escaped slave leaders in the Third Servile War, a major slave uprising against the Roman Republic. The third, actually. Yeah, people were pissed at slave labor. They were done. At first there was about 70 men, then that grew to an aggressive 120,000 escaped, trained, pissed off gladiator slaves. Yeah, that's absolutely terrifying. The Roman Senate's growing alarm about the continued military successes of this growing army led to Rome's army of 8 legions under the leadership of Marcus Licinius Crassus. With help of Pompey, of course, the war ended in 71 BC when, after a long and bitter fight, the Roman legions absolutely crushed them. Yeah, sorry Spartacus. He's a hero though. This rebellion is just one example of oppressed people fighting for their freedom against the oppressors. The Third Servile War was the last of the Servile Wars, and Rome would not see another slave uprising of this type again, as the impact had changed Rome forever.
Number 7, D-Day. June 6, 1944, Western Allies embarked on the journey that they have been striving for those many months. This plan amassed the largest amphibious attack in history, supported by a logistics operation large enough to supply a small country. Germany had constructed lines of defenses all along the coast of France. The Atlantic Wall, as it was called. It was going to be hard, and it was. American, British, and Canadian forces suffered many casualties, but after hours of fighting on the beach, they punched through and even further into German lines, Canadians making it the furthest on the first day. Why does this change everything? Well, because it gave Western Allies a massive forward operating base and a foothold in occupied Europe, effectively beginning to trap Germans between 2 large armies, the Western armies and the Soviet Union. Take that, Germany! Number 6, Stalingrad. All the way in the Eastern Front. None of this is pretty, but it's what happened. And no one paid the toll quite like the Soviet Union did. Germany marched into the Soviet Union by surprise, sending Stalin into a fit of rage. Germany got real close to Moscow, and in the process captured a stupid amount of POWs in the hundreds of thousands. It's crazy. However, when it came to Stalingrad, it wouldn't be so easy. A battle that lasted months. Civilians froze in the Russian cold and starved simply because the city was leveled, there was nothing left. After brutal urban combat, the Soviet Union began to push the Germans out, winning the Battle of Stalingrad, which honestly is more of a Pyrrhic victory, but this is when the Soviets began to reassemble their numbers, rebuild factories and buildings that had no walls or ceilings, and began the fight of pushing the Germans back to Berlin. It was the beginning of the end. Number 5, the Battle of Midway. Out in the Pacific Ocean, midway to Japan, one of the largest naval battles ever commenced. The Empire of Japan sent her best, as well as America sending hers. Aircraft carriers were sunk, planes at the bottom of the ocean, and then when it was done, America was victorious. God bless America. More important than that, Japan had lost some of its key ships from its fleet and could no longer engage the US at sea in fear of losing what remained of their fleet. It just wouldn't match up. So Japan stopped in her tracks, dug in her heels in the middle of the jungles of the Pacific Islands, and dared anyone to come and find them. And that's just what the Marines were going to do, effectively beginning the island hopping campaign that the Pacific War became defined for. Number 4, Battle of the Marne. It's quite possible that World War I is the cause and effect for every major conflict since, and a lot of stuff on this list too. Some historians think that the Great War is responsible, so if that's the case, then look no further than the Marne. In a nutshell, European empires thought this war would just be a little titter-tatter, be home by Christmas sort of deal. They always say that. Well, after a bunch of maneuvering and meeting at the sea, the race to the sea as they called, it was time to ditch the blam-blams and reach for shovels and picks, as this is where everyone dug in and built trench systems that stretched miles, thousands of them. It would also be the start of the horrible trench warfare, all thanks to the Battle of the Marne.
Number 3, Agincourt. The Battle of Agincourt was an English victory in the 100 Years' War. It took place October 25th, 1415 in northern France. The unexpected English victory against the numerically superior French army boosted English morale and prestige while simultaneously crippling France. King Henry V of England led his troops into battle against King Charles VI of France, although he wasn't actually there, because he was a little cuckoo at the time. Yeah, couldn't really be trusted on the field. Lots of knights and swords and stuff, you know? That's all I gotta say. This battle is notorious for archers. They won this war, hands down. The Battle of Agincourt is one of England's most celebrated victories to date. It's a history in itself, as it forms the backdrop to William Shakespeare's play Henry V. Number 2. Orleans. And again, cut to part 2 of the same 100 Years' War thing. The Siege of Orleans, aka Battle of Orleans, was fought October 1428 to May 1429. Again, between France and England. Yeah, they hated each other. From 1428 to 1429, it was the French Royal Army's first major military victory to follow their crushing defeat at Agincourt years earlier. A true grudge match. A young woman mounted on a white horse like a Valkyrie riding into Valhalla. 17-year-old Joan of Arc, the medium knight hybrid, chosen by God to lead the French to victory. Why aren't there like 38 movies about her? Like really? Under the Treaty of Troyes of 1420, England's Henry V became regent of France. By his treaty, Henry married Catherine, the daughter of the current French king Charles VI, and would then succeed to the French throne, cancelling out the Dauphin of France, also Charles. Oh yeah, the old switcheroo, huh? That chessboard of crowns, I tell you, just everywhere. Months of battles under the divine Joan led France to victory. The Dauphin crowned as King Charles VII of France, the hero, here being Joan, of course, who was later tried as a witch and hanged. The whole hearing God in your head thing kind of freaked people out.
Number 9. The Chosen Few. In the beginning of the Cold War, it was clear that the West had some spooky, scary communist enemies to deal with. And almost immediately after the world had sent Germany packing, the Soviet Union was acting up. And then China, and then Korea. Well, that was it. We had it. The West of America had enough of communism spreading. It was time to contain it. So American and UN forces went to Korea to have a discussion at the 38th parallel. One group of Marines at the Chosin Valley had a Chewy perspective of the event. When this group of Marines at Chosin Valley radioed in for a supply drop, they used the code word Tootsie Rolls, as it was a code for mortar shells that they so desperately needed. Well, apparently the radio operator didn't get the memo and had an actual crate of Halloween's second least favorite candy scent. Besides candy corn, no one likes that stuff. But being the Marines, they used it to their advantage. And after being chewed up and placed over holes and gaps, the chocolatey treat made for a great filler, especially after freezing in the freezing cold weather at Chosin Valley. Cool story. Number 8. Jenkins' Ear. The best way to describe life in the New World in the 18th century is aggressive corporate negotiations. The New World was full of plantations, trade, and YouTube's least favorite S word. So, also, naturally, the British Empire and its Royal Majesty wanted a slice of the Caribbean action. Trouble is, the Spanish had been there longer, and at the time, their presence was much more powerful. Well, the British had the means to de-Spanify the area, and all they really needed was a reason, because, you know, that makes war more palatable, right? Sure. Well, that's when they were presented with Robert Jenkins, a man who had his ear cut off by a bunch of Spanish thugs who raided his ship years prior. Turns out this was enough causey belly to start a war and fight over an ear. Hence the name in English, the war became the Battle of Jenkins' Ear. That's so weird. That's so strange. Imagine a guy, right, he's got his ear lobbed off. Time to go, let's go. I guess that's a reason, sure. Well, how long ago did this happen? It was like 10 years ago. Right, good enough for us, get packing.
Number 7. The Battle of Hydaspes. This battle was fought between Alexander the Great and King Porus in 326 BC. These guys scrapped hard. The fourth and the last battle in the conquest of Asia for Alex. Yeah, this one took a toll on him. It took place on the banks of the Hydaspes River in India, subcontinent modern-day Pakistan. The battle resulted in a Greek victory after the surrender of Porus. Scraping by, it seems. Yeah, after conquering the Persian Empire, Alexander got cocky and thought he could just waltz into northern India without a fight. The forces were pretty even, too. Alexander had more cavalry, but Porus had his secret weapons as well. 200 war elephants. That's the most badass thing I've ever heard. Imagine seeing a giant walking tank with tusks just chucking bodies and horses out into the sky. There's literally nothing more intimidating. No wonder Alexander barely won. When asked by Alexander how he wished to be treated, Porus said, "As a king would treat another king." Impressed, Alex, now king, allowed him to retain some of Porus's land. He renamed 2 cities, however, one called Nicaea, Greek for victory, and one after his horse. Yeah, talk about salt in the wound, dude. Number 6. Cannae. The Battle of Cannae was a key move in the Second Punic War between the Roman Republic and Carthage, fought on August 2nd, 216 BC, near the ancient village of Cannae. The Carthaginians and their allies, led by our hero Hannibal, not Hannibal Lecter, just Hannibal. One name. Well, he surrounded and practically annihilated the superior Roman and Italian army. It's known as one of the greatest tactical feats in military history, equally one of the most embarrassing by the Romans. I mean, the Romans were good. Literally a walking tank with shields and spears. They were practically unbeatable. But they rushed into Cannae, and Hannibal flanked the shit out of them. Yeah, him and a stew of about 50,000 rebel towns and cities, trapping the Roman army inside the city, who were then annihilated. Only about 15,000 Romans. Not a huge loss, but back at home, they were starting to panic, and the Romans started doing anything and everything they could to rebuild an army. It's forever known as a legendary and almost divine feat. Number 5. Hastings. The Battle of Hastings was fought on October 14th, 1066 between the Norman-French army of William, Duke of Normandy, and the English army under the Anglo-Saxon king Harold Godwinson. It took place approximately northwest of Hastings, which is present-day Sussex. A decisive yet Norman victory. The English army was almost all infantry and had few archers, whereas the French were an even half and half. The Normans did this really funny tactic where they'd pretend to flee in panic and then turn around and flank their pursuers. It worked every time. Most of the blame for the defeat lies in the structure of the battle. William was a more experienced military leader. He liked structure. Basically, when Harold heard that William had landed in England, he rushed south instead of taking his time to build a strong and large army. The English played offense way too much and got broken to bits. Harold's death led to the retreat and defeat of the English army. William was crowned as king on Christmas Day 1066. Number 4. Bannockburn. King of the Scots Robert the Bruce versus King Edward II of England. June 23rd, 1314. The First War of Scottish Independence. The infamous battle between Scotland and England was one of the most important battles of the Middle Ages. The end of a bloody war for independence. Long story short, Scots were like, yeah, we're gonna stay here and just continue to roll our R's. The gruesome wooden wars were caused by the English invading Scotland in 1296. Basically, he was like, bow and say I'm king, or good night. Well, a young warrior, William Wallace, guardian of King of Scotland himself, didn't really like that idea too much, and instead decided to hold off the English forces and was knighted a hero of Scotland. Although the bloody battle wasn't the end, it was definitely the most significant. Unfortunately, like every hero back then, he was also someone's villain. William was captured, hanged, drawn, and quartered. The battles between Scotland and England ended in 1328, 14 years later, with Robert the Bruce securing Scotland's independence and adding like 34 more dialects to the UK. Freedom!
Number 3, Stirling Bridge. There was one time growing up I had a super important test to take at school. I don't remember what class it was, but I remember studying extra hard for it. I mean, seriously, I opened the books and I hit them hard, brother. Harder than my little heart could desire. Studying my little heart out. It was really hard, correct? And now I'm thinking about it, it's probably math. Anyway, well, when I went to bed, I knew that I was going to be ready for that test. The trouble is, I woke up at 9:57. School started at 8:30. Not only did I miss the test, but when I retook it, I didn't do as well as I thought. Well, this is the case of the Battle of Stirling Bridge, except there wasn't really any awkward high school stuff going on. It was just more of a serious battle for independence. The very famous William Wallace and the Scottish were at odds with the English, as you'll find in history they do that. Well, that morning the British general slept in, and Wallace, seeing an opportunity, seized it, and seized the day and victory for Scotland. The lesson here? Set your alarm, folks. Don't miss the battle. Set your alarm. Number 2, Operation Cottage. Canada and the US have been friends for a very long time, and we will probably be friends for a very long time. We have apologized profusely for burning down the White House. We're sorry, eh? Didn't mean to do that, bud. I'm sorry there, guy. Sorry, friend. Jeez. However, did you know that in a classic World War II military snafu, Canadians and US soldiers fought each other? Kiska Island, Alaska, it had been occupied by a small group of Japanese forces, which is kind of a weird story on its own. How did that even happen? So we went to go kindly ask them to leave, as you do. Trouble is, when we got there were no Japanese, and in a very confusing battle after landing on two different points of the island, our two great nations fought each other where sadly lives were lost. It was rough. It was sad. It was like 30 Americans and like 4 Canadians. I don't know if we're just good shots or what. I don't know what it is, buddy. Number 1, Bull Run. The Civil War. It's the one that shaped America. Brother versus brother. And it's what your dad reads about in his spare time. I don't know, dads just do that. Bull Run is one of the most famous battles from the time. However, I don't want to focus on the battle itself, as I've nerded out too hard in history already today in this video. No! Why am I talking about this, and why is this in the number 1 spot? Well, that's because of spectators. Yes, that's right, spectators. Wealthy folks would often come to large battles like Bull Run on a decent vantage point out of the splash zone, literally, and view the ensuing horror that was the Civil War. And before you even ask, yes, they brought food and a picnic to enjoy the show. Maybe don't watch that. Just an idea. Next time. Yeah, oh well.
Number 9, Battle of Zappolino. Turning the calendars back to 1325, the Battle of Zappolino was a large-scale event over a bucket. Like a pail, like a literal wooden, I'm not even joking here. The War of the Oaken Bucket, that's what it's also referred to as. This war consisted of 2 Italian towns, Bologna and Modena. They all went head to head, and it kicked off when soldiers from Modena snuck into Bologna with intentions to steal the town's wooden bucket from the city's well. How horrible is that? I mean, resources were pretty sparse back then, so this was actually like a really big deal to do that. The Bolognese declared war immediately and sent in an invading force of 30,000 foot soldiers and 2,000 cavaliers. The city of Modena had a smaller army. They had only 500 infantrymen and 2,000 cavalry forces. Thing is, these guys still won. They chased the larger army back to Bologna while destroying towns in the process. Some recall them bringing the bucket back just to taunt the city. They came back like, oh, you want this bucket, eh? And they started smacking it with spoons and they just left again. The bucket is currently and still on display in Modena. If you want to go see it, go take a look. That took so many lives. That many people kicked the bucket over this bucket. History is strange.
Number 8, Operation Cottage. If you heard the title Operation Cottage and thought that maybe Canadians were involved in the process, then you would be correct. Unfortunately, this was a battle between Canadians and Americans during WW2. Back in 1942, Imperial Japanese Marines had landed a force in Alaska at Kiska Island. That alone is terrifying. You know, they were so close. America and Canada, finding out about this, were naturally alarmed. So in 1943, they sent some men to take care of the issue. When the Allies landed, a firefight ensued. Naturally, it's WW2, it happens. And both Canadians and Americans had casualties. The trouble is, it wasn't the Japanese. They had abandoned their post a few weeks earlier, as they deemed it was too difficult to defend, and it's Alaska. It's too cold. Anyone from that area could tell you the same. As it turns out, it was Americans and Canadians firing upon each other in a case of mistaken identity. Or not so friendly fire. Number 7, Charge at Crecy. The Charge at Crecy can be described as a Hail Mary. One final push. The last card. It's a 1v6 and search and destroy on high rise in Modern Warfare 2. Bottom of the 9th and bases are loaded. If Hollywood has taught us anything in life, it's that these events always work out for our hero. Well, sometimes real life isn't like Hollywood movies. Take John of Bohemia for instance, your classic 1300s guy. Marrying his way into royalty, a warrior, a knight, except poor John was blind in one eye due to a medical condition. Poor John. Well, at the Battle of Crecy, his bravery was put on full display. John had his horses tethered to other knights, because he was blind, as they made their last effort dash into the enemy, or charge if you will. They didn't make it. It didn't work out. And Crecy's like, right, I'm blind and what I'm going to do is, I'm going to tie your horse to my horse, and we're going to run straight at the enemy. Number 6, Napoleon in Moscow. During the Corsican Ogre's European tour, he let himself into Russia. More specifically, he made it all the way to Moscow. This was impressive for a couple of reasons. One, because he had defeated other European powers with really little effort, and he was about to defeat Russia. Finger quotes. About to defeat Russia. Back in the day, there was this notion that if you control the nation's capital, you win. Well, he had Moscow, but it was more of a Pyrrhic victory. Russia had enacted a military tactic called Scorched Earth, and it wouldn't be the last time they used it. Basically, back in the day, militaries relied heavily on the lands they took for resources, food, shelter, and supply lines. Well, you can't control that if there's no land to take. So Russia destroyed their land, food, fields, and really anything that would have been helpful along the way as they retreated. Also, the winters were very brutal and cold, and the French were not prepared. So mix that together and uh-oh, awkward. Number 5, the Battle of Mogadishu. Here's a modern one for you. It was a simple job. Grab 2 high-value targets, known collaborators of a corrupt Somali leader who's basically just a dictator. Things were going great until 2 $6 million Black Hawk helicopters were downed by enemies on the ground. An in-and-out operation that was supposed to last no longer than an hour. Tops, I swear, I promise. It actually turned out to be an overnight 16-hour rescue op that saw 18 Americans lose their life, known as the Black Hawk Down situation, or operation I guess. So what's the lesson on this one? I'm not really sure, to be honest. But what I do know is that it left a mark on 90s history and American military snafus. Number 4, Castle Itter. Okay, good guys wear one outfit, bad guys wear another. If the soldier in front of you sounds German and it's World War II, then it's probably the enemy. Chances are. It all makes sense, right? Well, the Battle of Castle Itter makes no sense. When World War II was coming to its climactic close, Americans and Allied forces were coming from the west, and all of Mother Russia was coming from the east. A lot of Germans fought to the bitter end, but the smart ones knew it was time to jump ship. You can see it was falling apart. And in the case of Castle Itter, they actually joined forces with Americans and allies to defend high-value prisoners from an SS detachment who still thought Germany could win. Spoiler alert, they could not win. It was over. And the joint force would see a victory. That's kind of cool. That's a cool story. Again, where's the movie of that? Where's the movie? Put me in the movie. Someone make me famous. Let's go. Hollywood directors, I'm talking to you. Number 2, Navy cheese. I can't lie to you guys, there's a part of me that would love to get into a time machine and join the Royal Navy in its prime, sailing the sea for Her Royal Majesty and getting into naval battles, just like you see in the movies. Or me, Pirate Captain Chetty, imagine that. Would also be pretty sick, and Captain Chetty and maybe Helmsman McWaters. It's all fun and games until wheels of cheese start causing mortal wounds. Wait, what did I just say? Yeah, during a naval skirmish between Brazil and Uruguay, things were getting a little out of hand. Brazil, having the superior navy, wasn't worried. Who cares? And besides, the enemy had just run out of cannonballs. What could they do to us? Before they could bust out the champagne and celebrate, however, the Uruguay ship fired back with wheels of cheese. And it worked very well. It destroyed a lot more than the Brazilian ship would like to admit, and was forced to retreat. Getting destroyed by cheese is not going to look good on the report.
And finally, number 1, the Battle of the Stray Dog. I grew up with dogs my entire life. I love dogs, but it's stressful at times. You open the door to look at a mailman for a split second, and all of a sudden your furry friend is running down the street after a blue jay. It's not easy. Now I'm running in my socks at 9 a.m. It's no good for anyone. Since the Second Balkan War in the early 1900s, Greece and Bulgaria were going head to head. A lot of conflict, a lot of emotions, tensions are high. Come October 1925, things escalated and exploded. A Greek soldier was chasing after his dog, who just decided to bolt randomly, as dogs do, but in doing so, he accidentally crossed the border into Bulgaria, so he was shot at. The Greeks at that point were beyond upset, so they marched into Bulgaria, and so began a full-on war. By the time the International Committee negotiated a ceasefire to, clear up the obvious misunderstanding that happened here, 50 people had already lost their lives. So keep those leashes on, folks. That's all I'm saying.